eastwards of Geneva. Welcome to this webinar on plastic waste inventories and ESM strategies development. The objectives today is to provide you an overview and an initial training on some of the tools that have been developed by the BRS Secretariat on these two topics. And it is really meant as an introductory training for the members, for the beneficiaries of the small grants program of the Secretariat. Because many of these projects within this program deal with these topics. So within the next 2 hours, we hope to give you an overview of the tools that have been developed. Now, I will first then show you the agenda that we have ahead of us today. Okay, and so here it is. We'll start by giving you an introduction to the Small Grants Program on plastic waste, its status, and briefly what will be covered by and the monitoring and evaluation exercise. Then we will move on to an introduction on approaches for developing an inventory of plastic waste, after which we will come to the core of this webinar, which is an introductory training on the toolkit for plastic waste inventory, developed under project, and then a tool for looking at considerations for the development of strategies for the ESM of plastic waste, or the environmentally sound management of plastic waste. You will hear me say ESM all the time. It's a slip that unfortunately we can't avoid since we use this word so often. So again, thank you all for being here. We will keep questions for the end of all the presentations so that we can make it more efficient. And for those of you who are not familiar with this platform, you will see at the, well, where is it now? You will see a raise hand icon. It should be to the right of your name in the participants list, which should allow you to raise your hand in case you want to ask a question. Alternatively, if you cannot do that, please put your questions in the chat and we will convey it to the presenter. So on that note, without further ado, I will pass the floor to my colleague Joost Dietrich from the BRS Secretariat to take us through the first presentation. Joost, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Melissa. And good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, to everyone. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, and I see it's a very large and very diverse participation that we have here today. So that's great news, and welcome once again. So I would like to start with just a few words to do a quick recap of the Small Grants Program on plastic waste, because perhaps not all of you may be that familiar with the process and with this program. So what we mean when we refer to the SGP on plastic waste is actually a series of projects on plastic waste that will be undertaken within the framework of the broader SGP, which as many of you know, was already established in 2008. So this SGP on plastic waste forms part of an ongoing project financed by NORAD called Further Actions to Address Plastic Waste under the Basel Convention. And so in these projects, in this program, we had two calls for project proposals in order to identify pilot projects that would receive funding. The national projects would receive funding at around $120,000 and the regional ones would receive funding at around $180,000. So following these two calls for proposals, which featured a wide variety of projects, and in terms of the scope of the projects, they covered, for example, these four items that are listed here on the slide under scope. So transboundary movements, environmentally sound management, prevention and minimization, and also looking into additives or hazardous constituents of plastic waste. And of course, as I assume all of you know, these projects are being implemented by the Basel and Stockholm Convention regional centers for the benefit of the beneficiary countries. So maybe also important to note at this stage that we are in fact foreseeing a third round of the SGP on plastic waste. We will provide further news as soon as we have more details available. So you can already maybe brainstorm, some of you, what could be further interesting projects that could be submitted. So with that, I can go to the next slide. So just a quick recap of the projects that have been selected so far. So here you have an overview of the first round of the projects that have been selected. So as you can see, with a nice geographic distribution. And then here we have the overview of the projects that were selected under the second round. So in the first round, there was a total of 7 projects, and in the second round, there was a total of 8 projects that were selected, bringing the total of projects to 15. Maybe important to mention that out of these 15 projects, 8 are now being implemented. Meanwhile, for 6 other projects, we are still finalizing the administrative arrangements, but we are optimistic that these can be resolved soon. And for one of the projects, the project proposal is still being refined. Okay, so here you have the overview of all of the projects. And of course, we'll share the presentation after, so you can have another look if you want to find out more details about the project. But since time is short, I'm not going to go into detail, just to mention some examples of the activities that will be implemented. For example, we have the upgrading of a community-run buyback and recycling center. I think that's in South Africa. We have the development of inventories, actually in a number of countries, so that makes it particularly important, the webinar today. And we also have activities such as the manufacturing of reusable bags through a women's cooperative. So just to give a taste of the rather diverse set of projects. So of course, when implementing these projects, it's equally important to ensure that we have a proper process in place for the monitoring and evaluation of the projects. So all of you, all of the regional centers that have prepared project proposals that are now or soon being implemented, actually already included in the project proposal an overview of the activities, of course, but then also the outputs which result from the activities, the outcomes, which in turn are a more long-term consequence of the outputs, and then the impact, which is kind of the overall long-term objective that we would like to achieve with these projects. And here on the slide, I've just included an example next to each of them to give you an idea of what we mean by activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And this is kind of the logic that that would also be followed in the projects themselves. And so for especially to measure progress at the output and outcome level, it's of course very important that we have indicators, a baseline, targets, and means of verification. And again, when you were developing the project proposals with us, we worked also a little bit together on this to refine these indicators, baselines, targets, and means of verification so that they are actually measurable, which is a very important point with a view to then later on undertaking an accurate monitoring and evaluation of the projects. So just to give an example, an indicator could be reduction in the tons of single-use plastic bag waste. And then the baseline could be the actual number that currently there is in terms of this waste generation. And then the target could be to reduce that tonnage. And then the means of verification would be, for example, the data could come from retailers, it can come from landfill operators, etc. So it's quite important that for your outputs and outcomes, you have these indicators, baseline, targets, and means of verification in place for the pilot projects. And it's also important to mention that this actually is not an exercise that comes at the end of the project, but rather it has to be done at the beginning, throughout the project, as well as at the end of the project. So for example, when it comes to, of course, the indicators have to be set at the beginning. The baseline has to be established as early as possible. And then the targets have to be established, but then measured throughout the project to see where you stand currently in achieving your objectives. And yeah, so it's quite important to make this a continuous exercise throughout the project. Another thing that I would like to mention is that there are some indicators that are project specific. So they only apply to the specific project given the specific nature of the project. So one example would be the amount of plastic waste reduced in a plastic-free high school. So that's an indicator that features in one of the projects, but it doesn't feature in other projects. However, there's other indicators that we should gather for all of the projects to the extent possible, of course. And one of them would be, for example, the estimated recycling rate of plastic waste within the country before and after implementation of the project. Another one could be amount of plastic waste falling under Annex 2 or Annex 8 of the Basel Convention before and after the project, or the number of regulations, policies, and strategies that are being implemented through the project. So these kind of indicators could be collected across the projects, and then at the end they need to be combined to form an overall evaluation of the SGP on plastic waste. Moving on, so of course, in the implementation, but also in the monitoring and evaluation, there's various guidance and tools available that you can use. I'm not going to go into much detail here because we've already provided presentations on these, but just to list them again here. Here, I would just like to highlight briefly that, of course, these guidance and tools also include those that we are presenting today, namely the ESM considerations, which will be the last presentation today, and the toolkit or methodology for the development of plastic waste inventories. And important to note that, in fact, and that's the linkage with the monitoring and evaluation, in some cases, the inventory and the data that it will generate can then actually be used in order to measure progress, and thus also in order to complete the... Yes, please.
Алло.
Yes, please. Hello.
Да, здравствуйте, Мария. Да, я вас слышу. Слышите меня?
Okay, I think maybe somebody accidentally took the floor. Can we mute?
Sorry, could you please mute your mic, everyone?
Пропала немножко связь. Когда вы хотели бы, когда вам удобно?
Can we mute her?
Just trying to.
Yeah. Okay, great. Right. Sorry for this little hiccup. So yeah, just wanted to mention that actually for the monitoring and evaluation, the plastic waste inventory toolkit and methodology may actually prove quite important, at least for some of the indicators. So with that, I think we can then also move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Joost. As I said, we will keep questions for the end of all the presentations. And possibly, I think, on the monitoring and evaluation, for which the recipients may have more questions, there might be a separate dedicated webinar to discuss that, I suppose. So this is coming, and watch the space. Then we'll move on to the next presentation, which is about trying. Yes, about an introduction to methodologies for plastic waste inventory. Let me ask Philomena, could you help with projecting the second presentation? For some reason, I'm not managing.
I'm trying to put that, but I think, hold on, I'm just trying to. Just got to give me a second. I just need to find out what the problem is. It's not.
Okay. If not, you can give me sharing rights and I can share my screen.
And that is also not. Okay, just give me a second and I'll just have to ask someone to come and help me on this. Just give me a second. Do you want me to?
No, I'm able to share my screen. Thank you.
You are?
Yeah, I
Okay.
hope. I just got the presenter role. Can you
Yeah.
see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, apologies for this hiccup, as we said. So, my presentation is going to be about giving you an introduction, very high level, general introduction to approaches for developing an inventory of plastic waste and some context for inventory work under the Basel Convention. So why do we need to do an inventory? I think that's a very intuitive answer. You can understand it intuitively, but I'll just take a quote from the framework for the environmentally sound management of hazardous waste and other waste adopted by the Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention. And this framework says that in order to be able to develop a strategy for ESM, you need to have a clear picture as to which wastes are rising and the quantities that need to be managed. And then understand how these need to be managed to ensure ESM. So really, development of an inventory is seen as an enabling condition for strategy development towards ESM. And here you want to understand how much is generated so that you can figure out how you're going to manage the waste. The development of inventory, though, is also seen as a way for collecting data to complete the national reports under the Basel Convention, which is an implication for parties to the convention. And there's various types of data to be reported, not just waste generation, but also information and transboundary movements and on the existence of facilities within the national jurisdiction. I mean, waste management facilities. So broadly speaking, these are the two main areas where inventories are addressed under the Basel Convention. And its importance is emphasized in all the technical guidelines on the environmentally sound management of specific waste streams, where there's always a section dedicated to inventories and its role for ESN. And here's a list of various activities that are ongoing related to plastic waste inventory undertaken by the Basel Convention, the BRS Secretariat. The first I'd like to highlight is that there's guidance under development on the development of inventory of plastic waste. And this is mandated by decision BC 14/10. And when at the 14th Conference of the Parties, where the plastic waste amendments were adopted. And at the same time, parties asked the Secretariat to develop this guidance. And there's a draft that's been made available in document OEWG 12 in 15th. And parties have been invited to provide comments on this draft. It will now be revised to be considered further at the face-to-face segment of the COP in June 2022. You can find more information about this line of work through the link that is shown on the screen here. And then, as Joost has mentioned, there's projects that are developing inventories on plastic waste. One of some of these projects, like the SGP, is funded mainly by the Norwegian Agency for Development, or NORAD. And then also within the framework of the Plastic Waste Partnership, there are further projects that are addressing inventory of plastic waste and also development of strategies for ESM of plastic waste. So taken all together, there's quite a body of work going on, and all this is meant to develop tools and also pilot test the tools with a view of improving them for further use by parties. So what are we looking for when we do an inventory? If we pick these two quotes from the ESM framework, it indicates that the outputs we're looking for are to find out what types and amount of plastic waste are being generated, and then what happens to that waste. Where does it end up? How is it being managed, if at all? Because needless to say, as you all know, the problem with plastic waste is that a lot of it is ending up in the environment. And there are generally speaking, two broad main approaches for answering this question. And this has been used in the past on other types of waste. It's not specific to plastic waste. The first approach is what we can call the product lifetime or consumption-based approach. Here, we take data on imports of plastic waste and on national production, imports of plastic products and national production of plastic products. And then you look at the lifetime of these products and apply a modeling equation to end up with the amount of plastic waste being generated at any one time. So that's why it's called consumption-based, because you look at what's entering the system and what's being produced by the system, and then you deduce how much will become waste. The second approach is more concerned at looking at how the flow, plastic waste flows within the boundaries of a system. So the systems usually defined as the economy or the plastic waste management infrastructure. And here again, it's about looking at flows and eventually understanding where the plastic waste resides and how much is leaking out of the system. Now, one question we've had has been, which approach should I use? And really, it's not a question about which, is that because both approaches are complementary. And it really depends on the specific objective of the inventory exercise. Now, both of these approaches are based on modeling, meaning collect data and then you apply some kind of computation and you arrive at estimates. And you will end up with amounts and flows at the national level, looking at, So, and this is usually the type of information that you need in order to devise policies on waste minimization. So under the Basel Convention, there's a general obligation whereby parties are meant to we minimize the amount of plastic waste generated. And this is one reason why there is a reporting need on this information. But then also it's important to understand how your plastic is being managed and where the flows are, so that then you can decide how you want to optimize the plastic waste management infrastructure in order to reduce the flows. So this is more at the national level. As I said, this webinar is meant to give you an introductory, very high level overview of the main approaches to plastic waste inventory. But this field is very dynamic, and a lot's happening in this area, which I will not cover today. At the other end of the spectrum, you have other initiatives and other tools that have been developed to look at the inventory in a more granular way. So you may have heard about the toolkit, a hotspotting toolkit developed by UNEP, which uses mainly these two approaches, this product lifetime and the material flow analysis, and then also goes on to look at, in a more granular way, at local hotspots of plastic waste. So again, also they are using modeling approaches. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have you have other initiatives, such as one called the countermeasure, which is being implemented in Southeast Asia by UNEP, and also similar approaches by the World Bank, looking at really where is the waste in the environment, and mapping that, and using citizen science to then understand where the waste is, what is it composed of, and then devising policies or measures to stop these flows, or maybe to clean up where the hotspots are. So one thing to understand about inventories is that the more detailed, the more precise, and the more granular you want it to be, you need the more data. And more data means more resources. So it's a question of understanding what your objectives are, what your resources are, and then choosing the right approach. Now, under the Basel Convention, we have developed a few tools to help parties undertake an inventory of plastic waste. And the guiding principle here is that we want to empower parties to do that for themselves and not have to rely on too much external expertise. So these are tools that are meant to be simple, that will give you a first generation inventory, and to the extent possible, rely on easily accessible information and data to get started. Also, the computations are clearly explained so that, so that the user can by themselves assess the sensitivity of the approach, and eventually how they need to adapt the methodology if needed to address their specific needs. And because plastic waste is so diverse and complex in its management, we have also developed some Excel-based tools to facilitate the application of these methodologies. And here again, these are Excel-based because it's with this idea of making tools available that are easily used and accessible to all parties. Now, the first one, the product lifetime and consumption-based approach methodology, has been already outlined in the document shown here and presented to OEWG 12. And there's an Excel-based tool and manual that is being finalized to allow easy application of this methodology. The second methodology, the material flow analysis approach, has been developed as part of a project funded by NORAD. And there's also an Excel-based tool. This is the topic of the next presentation, where you will get more detailed information on the use of these tools. So eventually, the aim is to integrate both these approaches into this practical guidance that is on the development of inventory, which will be presented to COP15 next year. And we also hope to have a workshop, a more general workshop on plastic waste inventory, where we will also talk in more detail about the product lifetime tools, and also we'll invite other groups working on this topic to give a broader overview of the different approaches that are now available to undertake an inventory. So again, watch this space, and yeah, it's not an easy topic, but I think definitely it's worth understanding what's available in order to make the best use of these tools. On that note, I will leave you with my contact information in case you have any questions. Thank you for your attention. Then I will give the floor to Archana to take us through the material flow analysis methodology, as I've just explained. Archana, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon good evening to everyone present here. Before I go into the presentation, would you like me to share the presentation from my end, or
yes, Archana.
Okay, I think I might need presenter rights, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Just.
Does that work?
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up. Thanks. Yeah, just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, can you change the display so you project it in presenter mode?
Yeah, is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So good afternoon to everyone again. So just sort of segueing in from what Melissa was talking about, we have developed an inventory. So I work as a consultant at Resource Future. Sorry, I should have introduced myself. And my colleague David Lepenier, who's also presenting today, and we worked on this tool on some of the pilot work that we did with the NORAD funded project. And as a product of that, we developed what is called a National Plastic Waste Inventory Toolkit, which assumes the material flow analysis approach to be able to quantify the amount of plastics that's generated and look at the flow of the plastic across the chain. So quickly moving into it, I'll talk through the toolkit, the structure of it, and the methodology behind the toolkit that was developed. So to start off, I'd like to clarify the scope of the inventory. The scope looks at the post-consumer plastic. So we've analyzed we were able to do a scoping exercise, look at the various sources of plastic waste. And as you can see, this flow shows the whole value chain of plastic waste, from its production processes to how it is consumed and what happens to it when it becomes waste. And we realized that there is a lot of the plastic that is largely mismanaged and is produced in large quantities it occurs within the post-consumer plastic waste. So that is the plastic that occurs in municipal solid waste streams. So that's what we have focused on. And that means we are looking at this part of the value chain, which is within the red box. And also this looks at the macro scale plastics, so not microplastics. So the inventory toolkit occurs in two parts. There is a methodology document which explains the overall approach of the methodology, the basis, the theory behind the methodology, as well as a step-by-step explanation of how to use the Excel toolkit that Melissa just mentioned about. And that is the second part. It has all the data pro formas and calculations that are conducted in the background, which is also available for the user to understand and see how the workings. So the material flow analysis approach, as the name suggests, we are looking at the flow of the material, in this case, plastic. We're looking at the point from where plastic becomes waste at the source and from generation, how it moves through the various stages, that is collection, sorting, transportation, disposal, as well as imports and exports, to understand what is happening, how is plastic waste generated, what happens to it, who are the actors involved in managing and handling the plastic waste, and if any plastic escapes the system, what happens to that, and then finally the fate of the plastic. So this diagram, which is a simplistic way to capture the various nuances of how plastic behaves in the system. So ideally this should be applicable in many country contexts, because every country has different levels of waste management. So what this diagram tries to do is talk about the major stages of plastic waste management. As I said, we are looking at the municipal source of plastic waste. The purple arrows show the movement of waste from generation through various stages, and the blue arrows show the escape of plastic waste. So as plastic moves through the system, depending on how well the management is undertaken and how tight the system is, there is a possibility that there might be some plastic waste that leaks from the system. So during collection, if it is not contained in containers properly, there might be leakaging. During sorting, again, if the environment in which the plastic is sorted is not contained well, there could be leakages. So the blue arrows they show the leakage of plastic waste. And then we have, it goes without saying that the quantification of plastic in a system will be incomplete without looking at imports and exports of plastic waste, because different countries will have different capacities to manage and treat plastic waste. So again, we're looking at any additional inputs of plastic into the system through imports, and any exports of plastic waste, which may then be processed further somewhere else. I will explain the different colors of the labels in a bit, but it's just to kind of we'll come back to this point again. But those flows that are marked in red here, in red circles, they are part of baseline data collection. So I'll explain that shortly. And finally, the other point here is some plastic always remains uncollected, and that becomes part of the mismanaged plastic waste. So uncollected plastic, as well as all the leakages of the system, will then become part of all the plastic that is not managed properly within the system. And the point of the inventory, therefore, is to understand to what extent plastic escapes the system, either by not being collected or leaking, and where all those leakages occur. So that is why we undertake the inventory. And I just going back to the other slide, I should also explain that we have some of the methodology is based on existing approaches. So there are lots of tools for measuring plastic waste and quantifying plastic waste. But this tool is based on the UN SDG 11.6.1 methodology, which is used by the Waste-Wise Cities tool for a lot of the baseline data collection, as well as the leakage estimation in the methodology is inspired by the waste flow diagram, which was designed by GIZ. So I'll go into those bits in a little bit more detail shortly. So the other characteristic of the inventory toolkit is the use of archetypes. So since the methodology has to be applied at a national level, different parts of the country could have different ways in which the waste is managed. And there are other factors that might affect waste management, and that's population, how rural or urban the area is, whether it's close to a coastal area, and whether it's landlocked. So to help divide the country into manageable bits for which individually we could do the inventory and quantify plastics and also produce a more realistic result at the end, we divide our study area, which in this case is a country, into archetypes, which are representative regions that share similarities. So those could be either in the demographics of the area, whether they're urban or rural. So population density will be a huge factor there, as well as what kind of management systems exist in these areas. So it is possible that rural areas may not have a very well developed waste management system. It may not have any collection at all, while urban areas might have very formal services or a mix of formal and informal services. So there's all of these factors which need to be considered, and dividing our study area into archetypes help deal with those differences and reflect that in the results that we obtain. So in this case, we suggest using 3 archetypes. We can call them mega, medium, or small. In this case, metropolitan areas, the large cities, could be one archetype. Smaller urban areas, so towns, smaller cities, they would come under these, the second archetype. And then all rural areas and very small towns, which will have very low population density, minimal waste management service provision. All of them will be part of a small archetype. So moving into the steps in the inventory, there are 3 main steps. The first is obviously baseline data collection. Then we estimate a factor for leakage for the various flows that we saw in the diagram. Using the data that is collected in the first 2 steps, calculations are undertaken to quantify each flow in that in the MF diagram, which then these 3 steps are repeated for each of the archetypes. So we will, as you can see in the screenshot below here, we have the mega and medium. The archetypes are in separate tabs, and for each archetype, we repeat these 3 steps. So for mega, you have data collection, leakage, estimation, and calculation, and then you repeat that for the medium and small archetype. And once those 3 steps have been conducted for all the archetypes individually, we will combine that data to create the national summary. So in the first step, when we talk about baseline data collection, it is important to remember that different countries will have different levels of data availability. Even within a country, the urban area might have more data available compared to a rural area. And it could be a mix of recent data versus no data at all, or very outdated data. So the thing to bear in mind is that when we start an inventory, we could be at different stages of data availability, and the more number of times the inventory is conducted, so in every iteration of the inventory, better data becomes available because data recording systems can be put in place. The people who conduct the inventory know what kind of data becomes important for the next iteration of the inventory. So in terms of reliability, it is important to remember that primary data, any study that is conducted at the time that the inventory is being conducted through field studies, stakeholder interviews, will be most reliable. And then there's also the other sources of data could be official records. So local authority, waste management department have records. Private companies who carry out waste collection might also have records, and any research that has been conducted in the most recent research on that subject will also provide some fairly reasonable peer-reviewed data. Then the data that is slightly older, say up to 2 to 5 years, will also work for the inventory, because although other factors such as population may have moved along, so there are changes that one can anticipate in the way that people move within the country, and any changes in the system, the waste infrastructure could also affect that. But if the data is slightly old, it can still be used, but it's important to then tag that as less reliable, so that future iterations of the inventory understand where the original data came from, and it puts the outputs also in perspective. And then finally, obviously, if there is no data, if there's also outdated data, but if there's absolutely no data, sometimes it has to be estimated. Data can be used from other geographies which are similar in demography and population to the study area. We can use existing data from somewhere else, and and failing all, if there's no data, we make assumptions based on expert judgment. So this could be based on the practitioners who conduct the inventory, or from the understanding of the industry, so talking to informal and formal sector personnel. So in terms of the data points required, as I said, this step largely relies on the methodology for data collection on municipal solid waste based on the UN SDG 11.6.1 methodology. So the Waste-Wise Cities tool does a very good job of collecting a lot of important data on municipal solid waste services. So ideally, it's good to be able to do something like that on through primary data collection, but often financial resources or time does not permit all of that. So there's always a mix of primary data, records, literature sources, estimations, assumptions. So there could be a mix of all these activities. In terms of the data points themselves, as you can see, there are some words which are in bold. So what we have done is rely on data that is likely to be available. So any records from formal services, either at designated disposal sites, incineration, recycling facilities, formal sorting facilities, are likely to rely on some sort of data recording system for their own logistical management or financial purposes. So it's good to start with those kind of data points, as well as the information about waste generation itself, which will need population information, rate of MSW generation, and percentage plastic waste. So to do a plastic inventory, we need to first understand how much plastic waste exists in the municipal waste that's generated, and for which composition data is very useful. So again, that could be through primary data collection where resources permit, or from literature sources and official records. A small amount of data will have to come from informal services, because they are an integral part of waste service provision in many countries. So we have tried to limit that to as less as possible. And in this case, we understand that there's a lot of plastic waste sorting and waste picking at dump sites. They could be designated or illegal dump sites. So a primary data collection exercise may be undertaken to either do a full-blown composition study, or stakeholder interviews to understand how much plastic waste the informal sector is able to take out from the dump sites from mixed waste. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also import and export data. So that can usually come from the customs department of the country. So there are official records, as well as global sources like the UN Comtrade. So the actual Excel sheet will explain the different sources available to the user to collect these data points. So this is what the Excel spreadsheet for baseline data looks like. What it does is the first few columns are for the user to understand what data they're collecting. So there is a reference point for the data. There's a description of what the data point collected does, and guidance on how to obtain that data. So where possible, it suggests conducting waste characterization studies, or field stakeholder interviews. And if that's not possible, estimations can be done. And as you can see with data point 4, for instance, there is an MFA reference. So that is the name of the flow of the of that plastic waste flow in that MF diagram that I showed earlier, which means that the data points we collect are a mix of some points that will be used for calculation, but some data points are the flows themselves, which is what I was talking about. The red flows in the red circles earlier, they are baseline data points themselves. So there is a mix of both. Then in the column that is marked in yellow, value, that's where the user can enter their data. And it's very good to also write as much information about where the user obtains that data from. So for instance, this case, for population, data was obtained from the statistical survey and which year it came from. And then you can also explain the source a little bit if estimations were done. So if it was, for instance, the proportion of plastic in municipal solid waste was obtained from the National Association of Sachet and Packaged Water Producers, it is then important to explain that the data came through the local project team, or it came from a study that was conducted a few years ago, which helps to then assign a reliability score for the data at the end. So we know that the population data is reliable. The next two data points are somewhat reliable, whereas the plastic waste in landfill sites, data point 4, is not as reliable. So in future iterations of the plastic waste inventory, these data points can be focused on to make them more accurate. Then for the step 2, we estimate leakage. So this is for the blue arrows that we saw in the MF diagram. What we are trying to do is produce a percentage leakage factor, which will help in calculating those leakage flows, which are L1 to L10. Now, to do that, we need to understand how the waste is managed within the system. And this depends on a quantitative as well as a qualitative understanding of the waste management system. And we do this by calculating the likelihood of leakage at every stage. So we saw that there was generation, collection, sorting. And for every stage, we are trying to calculate the likelihood of leakage. To do that, we look at a few factors that might influence leakage and then assign a score to it. So for instance, for collection could depend on collection containers, that is the primary receptacle in which the waste is received by the collection service. So this could be a big skip at the end of the road into which the neighborhood or the households in the neighborhood come and empty their waste. Then the method of loading. So from that receptacle, how do the collection actors take the waste out of that receptacle and put it into the vehicle that takes the waste away? And the primary transportation. So what kind of vehicle is used to take the waste away from point of generation? Is the waste covered well? Is it just covered with a net or a cloth? Is there a chance for the waste to escape? And similarly, collection containers, are they overflowing? Are they damaged? Is the waste well contained? And depending on how well the activity is carried out, there is guidance for the user to assign the score from very low to very high. And then depending on the score, which is already in drop-down menus, you can select the score. And then after all of the factors are assigned in different stages, the percentage leakage factor is automatically calculated in a table below this bigger table. Again, the formula for each of those calculations is provided on in the last column so that the user knows exactly what's happening with the data. And then the next step is the calculation of the flows. So after we have done baseline data and leakage estimations, we now need to calculate the individual flows in the purple arrows to see how much of plastic waste is flowing through the various the steps, as well as how much is leaking out of each stage. And so the calculation spreadsheet is designed in a way where the user does not have to actually do any input. So the user inputs are in baseline data and leakage estimation. And here the calculation is automatic, but the logic of the calculation is also provided for transparency. So each flow is listed under the stage that it occurs in. The description of the flow is provided, and then it is also assigned as either a key data point or a calculated data point. So key data points are the ones that the user has collected either through baseline data collection or leakage estimation. And calculated ones use the information from the baseline data or from the flows, existing flows, to produce an output. And then all of these three steps are repeated for each individual archetype to then create a national summary. So as you can see here, we have each flow listed as they were in the calculation spreadsheet with descriptions, and then the value, the output of those flows for individual archetypes by tons per day and tons per year, as well as a total national summary of each of those flows, which is a sum of the individual archetypes. So this then provides a detailed output on each of the flows within the MF diagram, using which the user can then produce a variety of outputs to understand, so to get whatever output you seek from the inventory exercise. So as examples, what we want to collect, say for reporting under the Basel Convention requirements, is to understand how much plastic of what is generated is collected by the formal and the informal services. And then there is some amount of the plastic which is not collected, which then becomes part of the mismanaged plastic, along with any plastic that escapes the managed plastic as well. So there is uncollected plastic as well as leakages from the plastic that is collected. Together, they make up the total mismanaged plastic waste. And finally, what happens to plastic waste at the end? So is it recycled? If so, how much? Is it incinerated and disposed? If so, how much? And to enable visualization of these outputs, the summary of the plastic output can be presented in a variety of charts. So this one here talks about leakages from individual archetypes and by different stages. So leakage from collection, how much of it is from the mega archetype, from the medium, and from the small. And also, we provide the ability for the user to visualize the whole system in a Sankey diagram, where you can see that out of the total plastic generated, how much is collected versus uncollected, and of collected, how much is leaked, recycled, disposed, etc. So again, that's another way to visualize the outputs. So this, in a snapshot, quick view, it was a quick view of the inventory, and I think we will probably take questions right at the end, but these are my contact details as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archana, for this clear presentation. It was a good overview of the tool and the methodology. And as I said, how it illustrates the key principles that I introduced in my presentation about having a tool that's easily used and relies on existing data. So I know I said we would take questions at the end, but I see there has been some hands raised already, and maybe that now that this is fresh in your minds, you may already want to ask your questions. So I'd like to open the floor now for 10 minutes to see if there are any questions that anyone wants to put to Archana. Please raise your hands or include it in the chat. Yes, I see there's Hemsing Humphrey who has raised his hand. Hemsing, please, the floor is yours. If you could introduce yourself first before asking.
Yeah, okay. I'm Hemsing Harinath from Mauritius, from the NGO sector of the small island states. Now, my question is not addressed to you, madam, but to Jost, right? I don't know if I can ask it now or later. Please, can I know?
Yeah, can we keep the more general questions to Jost to the end? Here, it's better to ask the questions meant for Archana. Is that okay with you?
Okay, Archana, thank you. So I will ask later.
Yeah. Next up, I see there's Jorens from UNEP. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much, Melissa. So yes, this is more a question which probably will go for Archana, but maybe others can also chip in, and it's really about how we measure, how we calculate the amount of plastic that is recycled. Mainly because what I'm seeing in those countries that begin to have statistics, many times the amount considered to be recycled is the amount that has actually been collected and that is going to recycling. But actually, I think it was in a previous slide, or maybe it was in the previous presentation, we could see that actually there are several steps towards recycling. So first we collect things for recycling, then we prepare the material for recycling, and there's already some losses there. And then when we get to the recycling facilities, there are probably still additional losses that go to other types of waste management. So the question is, when we get into these numbers and the statistics that countries will be collecting and reporting of the amounts that are being recycled, will we consider the amount that has been collected for recycling or the amount that actually goes out from recycling facilities and that can be integrated back into the economy? I very much, I would strongly think and recommend that we consider the amount that is effectively recycled, because if you collect 100, you bring it to recycling, but only get 60 out of the recycling facility. What we've recycled is 60, not 100. So I guess you get the point. And the question here is, I think probably we need a bit of harmonization of what different actors and different countries may already be considering. This, I think, would also be relevant for the amount that many countries are exporting. Many times the amount that is being exported for recycling is also considered as recycled. But as we all know, until that amount has reached the destination and has actually been processed, well, it is quite likely that not all of that amount will be effectively recycled. So in essence, just a question about what is it exactly that you are considering here, and maybe a plea to push towards some harmonization on something that that makes more sense, which I think is the amount that is going out of recycling facilities. I hope that was clear, and thanks for the time.
Hi. Thanks for the question. And yeah, I completely agree. It should ideally be how much is recycled at the end. So as you can see, I've brought up the slide with the MF flow. The RE1, which is the recycling flow, is actually one of the baseline data points. And I'm afraid in this case also, it is the amount that is received by a recycling facility. And the reason for doing that is, I should have mentioned during the presentation as well, this is a first generation inventory. So what that means is that it, when I was talking about the availability of data in, and the differences in how much data can be available and the accuracy of the data, it's quite variable in within a country itself as well as between countries. So this inventory is designed so that it's a starting point for a country to start looking at the various flows of plastic. So it provides not just a quantitative understanding, but also a qualitative understanding of what is happening within the system, who are the actors involved, and what is happening to plastic waste before it gets to a landfill or a recycling facility or is exported. So for that reason, we start off with the data points that are likely to be available and stuff that can be collected by users fairly easily. I mean, it still involves a fairly intense data collection process. But with a mix of primary data collection and estimation, these are the more slightly reliable data points that one can start off with. And as you do the inventory, as the inventory is done in more iterations over periodical, if it is done, say, annually or every 3 years or 5 years, the quality of the data in the further iterations starts improving, because there is there begins to form a system of data collection and data recording by all the actors, because they then realize what is expected of them every time an inventory is conducted. So hopefully through that process, this number begins to become more and more accurate. And then after that, you could develop a more accurate inventory, which then looks at what the amount of plastic waste that is actually recycled. So there could be an added step here, which then looks at how much plastic is recycled at the other side of this box. Hopefully that makes sense. And also I should just add that the recycling does the process in this methodology does consider the nuances of the steps before this recycling. So what happens during transportation? So from if you go back from collection, after collection, we're looking at informal and formal sorting. We're looking at leakages that come out. So there is some amount of plastic loss there. There is also some loss because of rejects, the RJ1, that arrow, as well as when it goes to transportation, again, there is some loss because of leakage during transportation. So we do try and look at it in a little bit more detail. But as I said, further iterations will improve the accuracy of the data. Melissa and Dave, if you wanted to add anything to this, feel free.
No, I think that's a very comprehensive answer, Archana. I think, and just to reiterate, I mean, this methodology is a first generation type inventory process, but it does include some consideration of those losses. And the only other point I'd make is that clearly it's really important to be transparent and consistent in developing the inventory. Clearly, transparency means we know what's included and what's not. Clearly, we want to try and represent recycling as accurately as possible, but we first and foremost, we need to be clear about what that number is that we're reporting. And then we also need to be consistent. And if the intention of the inventory is to provide a basis for improving the situation, and we want to monitor that year on year, then clearly we need to be consistent in what we're measuring. So in a sense, as long as we're measuring the same thing each year, at least we have a starting point for improving things and making and tackling plastics pollution. Melissa, do you want to add anything?
No, thanks. You guys answered it quite well. Just one thing that maybe there's no agreement as to whether what comes out of a recycling plant is actually waste or not. Yeah, when we speak about the recycling chain, it's not, I'm not sure there is a full agreement on what that consists of. And then also, I mean, the stages, and then when does something stop being a waste? But that's a different discussion. I'd like to now give the floor to Kitan Oluwagbe. I'm sorry, I can't see your full name. Yes.
Okay.
Oluwagbe.
It's Oluwagbe. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Evening or morning. My question is similar to what was asked earlier, but I'll need a bit of more clarification with respect to the leakages. When we have, for us in the country, we have informal sectors, aggregators, and all the formal material recycling facilities. What do you count as leakages? For instance, I want to be clear, if I bring sets of PET bottles, by the time when the market dynamics is only interested in collecting the bottle, but no one is interested in the label, is that a leakage? Is that part of the reject or what? This is just the clarification I require, please.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Kitan. Thanks for your question. That's a great question, actually. It would be, there is a difference between leakage and reject. So ideally, if the information is available from wherever the data is being collected to say that this we reject because we don't want it, and they do it consciously, you can record that as a reject. While the leakage flows are actually retrospectively calculated by going through the steps of the leakage, the drop down menu that I showed earlier. It is calculated based on the behavior of the actors at that stage. So there are, if we scroll down, when you go into the Excel spreadsheet, when you scroll down, there's separate columns for formal and informal actors. And then you can select select the factors based on their activity. So for informal, the behavior at a sorting facility would probably be different to how formal actors treat plastic waste. And in both cases, they're likely to say that they reject certain materials and what they do with the reject. So they might say that we collect it in a separate corner and it just goes away to a landfill, or it goes away to another facility. So all of that can be recorded based on the behavior of those actors, and then the factors. And hopefully there are all the factors that influence leakage cover those aspects of their activity as well. So yes, so if they actively discard a material because they do not want it as part of their process, that is a reject, versus leakage, which is something that they don't intentionally do. This is just how well this plastic is managed or not managed at that point. I hope that clarifies the question.
Now I see a question from Sabine.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. My name is Sabine. I'm from the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. I would like to ask for a little bit more elaboration on the archetypes, because I heard you saying that there will be 3 archetypes built in the background, but from our activities, we know that even within a country, and if you take only the cities, there is quite a big differentiation depending on purchase power, rural and urban population, tourist area or not tourist area, although all of them falls under the cluster of cities. So how have you assigned those specifics in the archetype building? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So with archetypes, what we do is we look at the population. So how you would divide the country up is not by area, but by population. So it is possible for, if you could get an estimation or the accurate data around what kind of population lives in a certain area, which shares its waste management characteristics with another area, then you could just pool up the population for that and apply that methodology. So in effect, you don't have to use only 3 archetypes. You could use more archetypes if necessary. This is just to keep it simple and easy to use. But if the information is available, so as an example, if you were looking at a great, so you have Accra and then you have Greater Accra. So you would not consider Greater Accra as your mega archetype, because that is made up of lots. There's the Accra region, which is the most busy and the most populated city area, and then you have smaller towns and semi-urban or semi-rural settlements around it. So they will become part of maybe the medium or the small archetype, versus the main part of the city will be in the mega archetype. So again, we are talking about the population that resides in the major city area versus the semi-urban or the semi-rural area. So it is which is why population is quite a key data point at the beginning.
Thank you, Archana. I hope this also answers a question from Irem in the chat, who asked Archana to explain the process of archetype selection and how many cities could be enough to get a country level analysis. I think, as Archana has explained, it's to be determined for each country situation and how you decide to structure your archetypes. Archana,
Yeah,
you want to add anything? Yes, please.
Sorry, go. I just wanted to also add that it could be up to the user how they create the archetype. So you could also use an existing system used by the government of the country in how they administratively manage a country. So as an example, in Ghana, they have the mega medium, they use metropolitan and the rural areas. They have their own structure. You could just assume the structure that the country of study uses, versus creating your own archetype, creating your own structure of archetypes based on the information available. So so it's up to the user to create that breakdown.
Thank you, Archana. And just, since Archana is mentioning Accra and Ghana several times, is that this methodology was developed iteratively and was pilot tested in Ghana. That's why a lot of the information that's shown is sourced from there. So then I'll give the floor to Percy from BCRC Nigeria to ask his question. Percy? Can you hear me? Percy. Okay. Well, while we wait for Percy, maybe he has a connection issue. And Gael, would you like to ask your question?
Right, thank you very much. So I'm from Plastic Shop. My question relates more to the part on the consumption and use and generation of waste. So which type of assumption did you use? So I know that you've looked at household plastics. So have you looked at a certain lifespan? Have you looked at the difference between consumption and use and waste generation and waste data? Have you observed the difference between these two? So you are consuming a certain quantity of plastic products, and then there's a generation of waste. Have you looked at these differences, for example, when you did the pilot testing in Ghana? I don't know if it's clear to me.
I think so. So I think it's important to state that the scope of the inventory begins from the point where plastic becomes waste. So we're looking at the waste that is, so we're looking, which is why we start with collection services. So we're looking at the plastic that is part of waste collection, where it is either as part of the mixed waste or separate collections, so segregated source collections as well. So it's specifically looking at waste generation data rather than consumption. And I think I might be wrong, but I think consumption data might be more helpful for the other type of, so not MFA, but product lifetime based studies, which then could be used to predict the amount of waste that is likely to be generated. Hopefully, I've got your question right, Anne.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Now, Percy, do you want to take the floor? Oh, okay. Well, that was a very good exchange on some detailed aspects of this methodology. We are now at 2:20, and I will give the floor to David to talk to us about considerations for developing a strategy for the ESM of plastic waste. And at the end, if there's more time and you have had time to think of more questions for Chana, we can take them then. Thank you again. So, David, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Melissa. If you could
I'll pass you the ball so you can
Thank you very much. I'm just going to switch my camera on briefly so that I can wave and say hello to everyone, and good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Good to see such a great number of participants, and to hear the exchange about the inventory methodology as well. Some really interesting key issues there that under development. Right, I now have control of the screen, so hopefully you can see.
Does it work?
There we go. I've just shared my slides, so hopefully you can see that. And that should be in presentation mode. Can you confirm, Melissa?
Not yet in presentation mode.
How about that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to run through relatively quickly, because I want to leave some time for discussion at the end, the framework we've developed for helping put together an environmentally sound management strategy for plastic waste. I'm going to use the ESM acronym. Apologies for that, but it comes up so often that it's a bit difficult saying environmentally sound management over and over again. So really, just to provide a bit of context to this, clearly we've developed this framework as part of the NORAD funded project. I should highlight that it's not formal guidance in the terms of the Basel Convention Conference of Parties. The intention is to provide a useful framework that will help practitioners sort of navigate their way around the complexity of actions and initiatives that could be put in place to tackle the issue of plastics pollution. So I'm going to, touch on briefly what ESM is in the context of plastic waste, because that's a pretty good place to start. I'm then going to discuss the main components of this framework document. They are some cross-cutting elements that are needed to achieve ESM for plastic waste, the kind of process that you would use for putting together a strategy, particularly the baselining process. And then I'm going to touch upon the different measures, if you like, the policies, the actions and initiatives that can be used to try and improve and achieve ESM for plastic waste. And that's really the gist of this framework, is to really help the practitioners in what is a complex and continually evolving space to identify appropriate actions that can be implemented to tackle plastics pollution. So we know, you'll all be familiar with with Article 2 of the Basel Convention, I'm sure. The ESM is taking all practicable steps to ensure that hazardous waste or other wastes are managed in a manner which will protect human health and environment against the adverse effects which may result from such waste. So that's our starting point, and that's what this framework is aiming to help achieve for plastic waste specifically. Now, the convention also identifies, or the ESM framework that's being developed under the Basel Convention also identifies 5 guiding principles, and we've incorporated those into the framework. I've listed them there. Clearly, that's prevention and minimisation is a key issue, and that's the place to start when we're dealing with waste. Sustainable use of resources in both production and consumption is a key point. We need to recognise waste as a potential resource. I will touch on the issue of a life cycle approach and life cycle thinking a bit later. And then clearly we also need to recognise that services, production processes, consumer behaviours, our understanding of the issue is changing all the time. So it's important to recognise the need to innovate as well as part of any strategy. And when we talk about ESM for plastic waste, what we're really trying to do is address these negative impacts that are typically caused by plastic waste, and with which I'm sure we're all familiar: the pollution of land, rivers, beaches, the marine environment, harmful air pollution from particularly the burning of plastic waste, which is a relatively common practice for managing waste plastic. It causes some very damaging local air pollution issues, as well as being a key contributor to climate change, particularly in terms of being a key emitter of short-lived climate pollutants. And also, plastic waste is a potential resource. It can be recycled and used as new input for new products. So if we don't manage that and we lose it, then we're losing the value of that to the economy. So in developing this framework, we've identified or set out 4 cross-cutting elements that are essential really for achieving ESM of any waste, but particularly plastic waste. And the idea is really this is the enabling environment you need to create to allow sustainable, effective, proper management of plastic waste in a safe and environmentally sound way. And those 4 key elements are policy and regulatory and institutional environment. So clearly that needs to be clearly defined to provide the basis for operators and all key stakeholders to do what they need to do and support effective plastic waste management. The second element is sustainable financing. Now, I'm sure everybody's well aware that managing waste costs money. It's a financially demanding thing. The value of recycled plastics in particular very rarely covers the cost associated with collecting, sorting, treating and preparing that waste for recycling or reuse, or at least to an adequate standard to meet ESM. So it's really important to think about revenue flows. Where is the money going to come from to pay for a sustainable, long-term sustainable system for managing plastic waste? Thirdly, there needs to be the technical capacity in place. When I talk about technical capacity, I'm referring to both the technologies, the infrastructure, the systems, the physical systems that are in place for collecting, sorting, treating plastic, and recycling it, and also the technical knowledge, the people with the right expertise and capacity, and the right number of people with the right expertise and capacity to develop and implement effective systems for managing plastic waste. And then fourth, last but not least, clearly stakeholder interaction, awareness and communication issues are a fundamental enabling element for ESM and plastic waste. We all generate waste as consumers. Every organization has some involvement in waste, and then there are key stakeholders who obviously have responsibility for managing that plastic waste, both formal and informal stakeholders. If we want to create change and tackle plastic pollution, we need to engage with the whole range of stakeholders and encourage behavior change to promote effective management of plastic waste. So those are the four cross-cutting elements that the framework defines. Just to quickly touch upon the waste hierarchy, I'm sure this is very familiar to you. Essentially, a list of potential actions to take to tackle waste in preferential order, with waste prevention right at the top and disposal at the bottom. It's probably worth highlighting that that under disposal, you could also argue there is uncontrolled disposal as the very basis, the foundation on which you want to build the waste hierarchy and move up the waste hierarchy away from, because clearly large quantities of plastic waste are currently mismanaged and disposed of in an uncontrolled manner, as opposed to a controlled manner, which I would define as effectively managed landfill. Clearly, there are lots of details in the definitions of that, which I could refer to you to if you're interested in that topic. I won't dwell on that, but just to say that it does form part of the framework, and you'll see it come up in the way that the measures and initiatives that are captured by the framework are presented. So the next component of the framework is really is establishing the baseline. So this is the process of really assessing the current situation, understanding what the situation is in terms of, firstly, how much and what types of plastic waste are generated, and where it goes under the current circumstances. Now, Archana has already explained or described the inventory methodology that we've been developing and have applied in Ghana as a pilot, and really that is the basis for understanding the generation and management of plastic as things stand at the moment under the baseline. And clearly, in doing this, you are collecting a lot of information on not only the quantities that are generated and the composition of plastic waste that is generated, but also the flows of plastic and the stakeholders involved as well. So this whole process of developing the plastic waste inventory is an excellent place to start to really develop a detailed understanding of what currently happens to plastic waste in an economy, and in particular where it is currently being managed well and where it is not being managed effectively. So where it is leaking from the system. And this basis, provides you the starting point for developing an effective strategy for achieving ESM of plastic waste. The second step to the baseline assessment is to consider each of the four cross-cutting elements I mentioned. So to consider what the situation is at the moment in terms of policies, regulations, institutions, and standards. To consider what existing financial flows associated with plastic waste management are. To consider the current levels of technical capacity, both in terms of technology and technical expertise. And then thirdly, what the current situation is in terms of stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders? Who's currently involved in plastic waste management? Who should be involved? And what's the level of awareness associated with those stakeholders? And in the framework, we've set out a series of sort of key questions to think about. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a series of key questions to think about in terms of understanding the current baseline situation for each of these elements. So, for example, for element one, you want to think about, well, what are their policies clearly defined already in terms of plastic waste management? Is it clear who's responsible for monitoring and enforcing regulations associated with plastic waste? Are there regulatory instruments that actually provide for penalties for violation of rules for managing plastic waste? So by going through these sort of series of questions and considering what the current situation is in terms of policies, regulations, institutions and standards, it tells you what already exists and how well it's working. And it also identifies the gaps. And that is, you know, one key component of developing an effective strategy and identifying some measures to implement. Element 2 is about sustainable financing. So the key considerations here are really, well, how is plastic waste management currently financed? Is there an EPR scheme, an extended producer responsibility scheme, I should say, in development or established, or is there some sort of voluntary setup that helps finance existing plastic recycling activities? Then also to think about, well, what's the value of plastic that is currently collected, and what are the potential markets for those issues? And clearly there are lots of other questions to consider as well in terms of understanding the existing situation with regard to sustainable finance for plastic waste management. Third element is technical capacity. As I said, you know, with the way we've set this out is really to think about it in terms of both human technical capacity. So is the expertise there? Are professional standards defined? Are there enough people with the right knowledge to really grow plastic collection, recycling, and other initiatives to tackle plastics waste? And then secondly, is the actual infrastructure and technology in place to manage plastic waste? Has it been developed, and what potential is there to innovate around that as well? That's another key question to consider. And then finally, element 4, the key issues to consider here are really around, well, who are the key stakeholders as a starting point, but also, you know, what levels of collaboration are there? What collaboration would you expect to see or want to see? What role does the informal sector play? Clearly the informal sector plays a fundamental role in management of plastic waste in many countries. So it's really important to consider the role that the informal sector plays and to identify who the key stakeholders are there, whether there are, for example, NGOs that represent the informal sector, and to engage with them to understand the situation, understand their concerns, and help collect data that will inform the inventory. And then to consider issues around communications. You know, what communications are there at the moment on plastic waste? Is there good awareness of the need to reduce and prevent plastic waste and to recycle that waste that is generated? And you know, what existing initiatives are in place in terms of national communication campaigns on plastic, for example. So these four sort of series of questions help you understand, are intended to help you understand the existing situation in terms of those enabling conditions. So once you've conducted your baseline and you have as good a plastic waste inventory as you can pull together, and that helps you give you a really good understanding of the existing situation in terms of plastic waste management as it stands and quantities that are developed, and you have a really good understanding of those 4 key elements around policies, regulations, around financing, around technology, and around stakeholder engagement, you can then think about, well, what initiatives do I need to put in place in terms of short, medium, and long-term activities that will help move towards environmentally sound management of plastic waste? And what the framework seeks to do is really set out the different measures that are available to promote effective plastic waste management. And clearly there are lots of different measures that can be taken, ranging from technology-focused activities to increase recycling, to awareness-raising campaigns, to new legislation that legislates for extended producer responsibility, or bringing in economic instruments that tackle plastic waste. So the range is very broad, and what we've sought to do with this framework is to help provide a means for a practitioner to navigate their way around those different measures that could be applied, and to think about those measures in the context of the baseline that's being prepared. And the way it's presented is in terms of the waste hierarchy, but it's also important to recognise that you need to think about measures that can be implemented at any point in the product life cycle, because clearly you can tackle plastic waste by, for example, looking at how raw materials are produced and converted into products. You can look at the way that that plastic products are generated, consumed, and then become waste. And you could also look at measures that tackle, further down the value chain, issues around recycling, sorting, and recovery from a value from waste, and also disposal as well for those plastics that don't get that is currently not feasible to recover value from or recycle. So for each of these, essentially each level of the waste hierarchy, the framework presents a series of different measures that could be applied, and the idea being it gives you almost like a menu of measures to consider in developing as part of the strategy. So, for example, at the top level of the waste hierarchy, around prevention, some of the key measures are around, well, phasing out, for example, hazardous substances in plastics. So, for example, one example is it's possible to ban the use of PVC in labels for plastic bottles, and because PVC, once if it's burnt in an uncontrolled manner, it generates harmful gases, and one way to tackle that is to prevent the use of PVC in plastic labels in bottles, which is quite an effective way in some contexts of tackling that issue head on. So using a regulatory approach essentially to prevent that waste. Moving, clearly another issue associated with waste prevention activities is the use of alternative materials, substituting fossil-based plastics or other types of plastic or other materials for that matter. But this slide here really just highlights the issue associated with substituting fossil fuel-based plastics with other types of plastics. I won't dig into this. Clearly, this is a subject in its own right, so I'm not going to dig into the detail here. But just to highlight, clearly, it's important to consider whether bio-based plastics are a suitable alternative for existing fossil fuel-based plastics. Clearly, there are issues around the production of those bio-based plastics that need to be considered carefully from a life cycle thinking approach. The issue of biodegradable plastics is also very important to consider, and it's very topical and evolving quite fast. In most cases, so-called biodegradable plastics require very specific conditions to degrade into benign products. So it's really important to consider that in terms of taking measures to replace conventional plastics with biodegradable plastics, because it may be that the infrastructure is not in place to actually handle those biodegradable plastics, in which case they potentially cause more of a problem than a solution, because they will then contaminate conventional plastics recycling systems. So that's a really important issue to consider. And then finally, just to highlight the issue of oxo-degradable plastics, as you know, they've been banned in the European Union, mainly due to issues with the fact that these plastics that are termed oxo-degradable typically include additives that just allow them to fragment and fragment more effectively. So it almost exacerbates the problem of plastic pollution by potentially creating more microplastics in the environment, because those plastics to which you add oxo-degradable additives then fragment faster. So it's really important to consider these issues in particular in terms of thinking about measures for preventing plastic waste. So moving on down the waste hierarchy, clearly minimization is the next one in the list. There's a whole bunch of measures you can take that relate to waste minimization. I mean, economic instruments are one way to clearly incentivize the minimization of use of plastic. To give an example from the UK, there is due to be a tax levied on plastic packaging that does not include a certain proportion of recycled plastic. The intention being that that's an economic incentive for minimizing the use of virgin plastic in plastic packaging. So that's one example of a measure that can be used to promote waste minimization. Reuse is clearly another raft, sort of group of measures that should next be considered in terms of tackling plastic waste. One good example there is the use of deposit return schemes, which are clearly very well established in many parts of the world, whereby consumers pay a deposit on typically a beverage container, a glass beverage container in most cases, and then there's an incentive there for the consumer to return that beverage container back to its production point when it's been used, so that it can be cleaned and refilled and reused as a new beer bottle or a new milk bottle or whatever it may be. Fourth level we consider in the framework is around recycling. Clearly, there are all sorts of measures that can be used there. I mean, this is quite just to highlight that the sort of stakeholder engagement aspect is quite important in terms of recycling, because clearly consumers play a key role in, or the waste generators play a key role in making sure that recycling works by ensuring that plastic waste items that have been generated go to the right place, so that they are transferred to recyclers who can then recycle them and make them into new product, make that material into new products. So clearly, if you want to promote recycling, one of the key sets of measures you need to consider very carefully is the need to raise consumer awareness, provide clear information to consumers, and set clear standards for producers and manufacturers and retailers to make sure that it's very clear what needs to be done with different plastic waste items. I'm just going to skip through the last few. So recovery is clearly some plastics currently can't really be economically recycled. So clearly you can take measures to try and promote the recovery of value from those, using non-recyclable plastics as a component of fuel for cement. The cement industry is a fairly well established measure, and clearly you can unpack that into a whole bunch of economic and regulatory incentives to make sure that happens. Chemical recycling certainly worth a note. It has the potential to recover energy value or material value from what are very difficult to recycle plastics, such as multi-laminate films and sachets. It's not widely established as yet, though, so it needs to be treated with caution. And then finally, clearly, in many contexts, disposal is still an important element of the waste management system for easily recycled or value recovered from them. So it's really important to make sure measures are in place to ensure that disposal is controlled, and to prevent illegal dumping, and develop properly engineered and operated landfill infrastructure to capture that waste material. Clearly, once that's in place, it's possible to then think about other incentives and mechanisms and measures that will disincentivize disposal to landfill. So, for example, banning plastics disposal to landfill, or implementing a landfill tax, which is an economic incentive to divert waste from landfill to other management means further up the waste hierarchy. So, just to very quickly recap, the document is a framework. It's intended to provide a bit of a way for practitioners to navigate the way around the raft and measures that could be used to tackle plastics waste and promote ESM of plastic waste. And it's based around these four elements, these four enabling elements, and then it presents a sort of toolbox of individual measures that can be used to achieve ESM. So the idea being that this document provides you with a way to navigate through that and develop a strategy for ESM of plastic waste that is thought through and based on evidence compiled as part of the baseline in the inventory development. I'll skip this because I think we're going to come to questions at the end. My contact details will be on the slides if you need them. And just finally, to highlight that there are a bunch of best practice examples on prevention and minimization of plastic waste. I think Jost is going to say a few words about this slide.
Yes, right. Thank you very much, David, for the thorough presentation. So yeah, just very quickly. So in the context of the BRS NORAD 1 project, we have been developing a collection of best practices, case studies, success stories, whatever you may call them, in various sectors. And we have focused in particular on the packaging, fisheries, and wastewater sectors, or also microplastics. And so what we have come up with is a list, an initial list of approximately, if I recall correctly, 150 different examples or best practices, which we hope, of course, could inspire action by others. So these were cases that have been successfully implemented and leave a lot of room for replication. So the idea is that that many of these practices that are listed there could actually really nicely fit in and give life to the various parts that David has just mentioned in the ESM strategy. So, for example, when he talked about prevention measures, then there's various examples included in this tool that really flesh out, okay, concretely, what kind of prevention measures can you take, or also when it comes to minimization. So for example, there's a section that lists several examples of refill and reuse systems. There are sections outlining examples of plastic-free alternatives, and many others, also extended producer responsibility, etc. So it also very much speaks to the other cross-cutting themes that David just mentioned. So it talks about, it brings concrete cases of policies and regulations, for example, also standards. It also has reference to financing models, etc., etc. So this is just to make you aware that this publication is coming up. So the collection is already completed. We are finalizing the report right now, and the report will make it as user-friendly as possible. So it will contain a lot of examples so that these can be used as widely as possible. So hopefully these two tools, this collection of best practices or case studies, and the ESM considerations prepared by David and team, I think they will nicely complement and can hopefully be very helpful in your efforts. Thank you.
Do you have a pair of sneakers or something?
Excuse me?
Well, thank you, Joost. I think this was someone who did not mute there.
Yeah, I heard sneakers, so I got confused.
Thank you, Joost.
Thank you.
So we don't have much time left, and I just already thank all the speakers for the effort in providing us with these great presentations, and David and Archana for the hard work in developing these tools. And so I'd like to open the floor first, because we've just heard David, for a few questions to David, if anyone wants to ask them, and then we will go back, because I know there are some general questions to Joost on his presentation. So the floor is open for questions to David. I'm sorry, I cannot see all the chats that have been listed, except as pop-ups. So I'd like to ask you if you have a question now to raise your hand and speak it out. Any question? Okay. I see Dominique Sanchi, please.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for these two
What is it?
tools. Can you hear me?
Ah, capsules.
Yes, we can.
No idea.
Oh, amazing, thank you. Yeah, so thanks so much for these two tools. I'm very excited to have an in-depth look at them. I just want to clarify when you think both of them will be available, because you mentioned that you're currently just finalizing the report and the spreadsheet, and we'd just like to learn about the timeline a little bit
There
more.
was about
Thank you so much.
167, but now there are 97.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I mean,
Philo, we can hear you.
sorry.
Yes. So Dominique, for the material flow analysis approach, the tools are actually at least in a first iteration completed. So we are doing some editing now, and we hope to make that available within the next week or two to the at least to the implementers of the SGP program and the various users, so that they can apply it. Does that
Okay,
answer your
perfect.
question?
Thanks. So I'll just watch out for this on your website, I suppose, and communication channels. Or is there some sort of a subscription list that we can get informed once they are available?
Well, for the SGP beneficiaries, we will contact them directly. And also, yes, I've provided the links to the various parts of our website for these related to this work. So you could also look there. Okay, then I'll turn to Sabine.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. I would like to go back to the first presentation. There was a discussion regarding the baseline and how to set it up. And I'm wondering, because one of the biggest difficulties in that respect is creating the boundaries and to compare apple with apple, so that not the plastic consumption is from year one is compared with the plastic waste generation and collection from the following year. And then if something is put on the market because it is produced, is this already the entry when you account it? Or is it only if it is commercialized, meaning sold? Because quite a lot of material is produced going into a warehouse and it's not put on the market at that point in time. So could you elaborate a little bit how you have foreseen this boundary setting so that you have an utmost accurate baseline? Thank you.
Ochana, would you like to answer that one?
Sorry, my audio failed a little bit. Could you kindly repeat that question, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So one of the challenges in this baseline setting is to have it the accuracy, and having something produced in a year doesn't mean it is also commercialized and used, meaning that this will be in the waste stream. So the point, how do you foresee, or what is the guidance provided that definitely the product, the commercialization amounts from year X with the waste amounts from year X are compared, and not the wrong years are put in the comparison, and that everything what is produced but not sold is accrued for the next year? Or how have you seen this and implemented this in your guidance?
Yeah, sure. So it's definitely the synchronization of the years is an important part of the inventory, and the guidance specifically says that ideally the data sources that we use, whether that is literature sources or official records, ideally everything could be from the same year, but that's not always possible. So often it allows you to use maybe information from, say, a span of 2 or 3 years that are close to each other, and therefore might share certain characteristics such as population, which will obviously determine the amount of waste that's generated. At the same time, it allows the user to then assign the reliability rating for that data point. But equally, some data points, if they are very old, might require an additional level of estimation or some sort of manipulation to make it more relevant to the current, the scope of the inventory or the current year. And the guidance tries to explain how these estimations can be made. So there is an element of looking at the data and maybe modifying the data a little bit if it is not reliable. But from experience, I think the first generation inventory will not produce a very accurate picture of the plastic waste flows. It will give you a sense of where the major leakages are, where, is there a shortfall in the amount of recycling compared to how much is being generated. But ideally, sources of information can be, if we focus on facilities, people who are waste practitioners, either working in the waste management industry or studying the waste management industry. It's good to have reliable sources of data, which are likely to give you, even if they're estimates or expert guesses, they're likely to be closer to the actual figure than not.
Thank you, Ochana. If I may add to this, it's plastic waste inventory compared to other waste is particularly difficult because of the complexity of the value chains of where plastic is everywhere in the economy. And so in doing the inventory using this approach, and I think, Sabine, your question is more relevant for the other approach, which is this consumption-based analysis. It's very important to define clearly the limit of your boundaries for the exercise. And that's also why we want to make all the calculations available to the user so that you can understand what are the limitations of the approach you have used? Like you said, if there is, for whatever reason, a caveat there, you know, you have to be aware of that when you present the result and what that might mean. If there for some reason there, as Ochana said, then there's a lot of uncertainty around a data point, then that you could not resolve in this round, this iteration of the inventory, then in the subsequent rounds, hopefully you can do that. So being fully aware of what really is entailed in determining your outputs then allows you to know what are the weaknesses of your analysis and you know, how big the grain of salt is, so that hopefully when you have more resources, you can tackle them. I'll then give the floor to Jorens from UNEP, please.
Hi, thank you very much, and sorry for taking the floor, but thanks. That was a very good presentation, and I must say, so David, I also asked the question in the chat, because in the first slide when you spoke about the approaches to well, to looking at or resolving plastic waste across the life cycle, I think the first slide didn't mention reuse, but then very rightly you pointed at reuse as well later on as part of the waste hierarchy. I just wanted to highlight, well, first ask one question or ask a couple of questions. We see again and again in life cycle assessment studies that reuse models can be much better from an environmental point of view than relying on single-use products of whatever material. I mean, here the point is not so much about plastic or not plastic. It's really about if we're using products only once or packaging only once, we can improve this significantly by moving to reusable systems or refill schemes. So in that sense, I would suggest that actually these steps should appear first. I don't know whether these appears as kind of a succession of recommendations in this guidance, but reuse certainly is far superior, as we see in most LCA studies, than that changing the material. So moving to a material that we can think or we may have the impression that is better for the environment than plastic. So I wanted to note this and that there are significant resources already available that pull these studies together. But then I was also, my question was whether in this guidance, the likely environmental effects or potential savings from shifting to these different alternatives are in any way estimated, or at least an idea, an order of magnitude of potential savings of these different strategies in terms perhaps of waste, but also in terms of saved greenhouse gas emissions if we move to different alternatives or to reusable schemes, for instance, whether this is envisaged. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. And you highlight a really important issue, actually, around the real need to look at this through a life cycle thinking lens. And I think that probably comes through in the framework document itself, probably less so in my slides, that really you need to think carefully about what are the life cycle impacts associated with different measures, and where you put, you know, material substitution is debatable really in terms of how you structure it. The document's really intended as a guiding framework. It's certainly not exhaustive or too prescriptive. I'll be frank, it doesn't include that kind of detail on the sort of costs and benefits and externalities associated with different options. Clearly, that is quite a detailed area in its own right. I mean, there are some references in there to other supporting pieces of information that would provide you with that kind of information, but it isn't really possible to get into that level of detail to be able to provide a kind of like-for-like comparison of different options. But clearly there are other sources of information out there that do that and provide that kind of information. And the intention with the framework is really to provide a process for practitioners to understand the issues and then seek other supporting more detailed information where needed in a targeted way, because clearly there's awful lot of information out there on these type of issues in terms of approaches and details that could be used, and we didn't want to duplicate that. We really wanted to provide a way of a roadmap for working through it. I hope that answers your question. It would be, but two really important points. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Right. So those are all great questions. I think there was someone from the beginning who had a question for Joost. If he's still there, this is the time to ask it because we're getting to the end of our webinar.
We already settled it on the chat, I think.
Oh, great. Then, yes, we're past 3 o'clock. I will just make one last call for any remaining questions to either of the three speakers or to myself. If you have one now, please raise your hands. I don't see any hand. Then you have our contact details and you can send us an email, or we will be happy to address your questions. And as I said, we are working on the finalizing and putting some finishing touches to these tools, and we will make them available for further. I think at this stage I have to say pilot testing, because as some of the questions have alluded to, there are still many aspects that could be improved. And we hope that through these projects, under the SGP and the plastic waste partnerships, we'll get further feedback and to improve these tools. And again, eventually we'll integrate everything in the guidance, the practical guidance that will be considered by the COP Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention at its next meeting next year, hopefully face-to-face in June 2022. On that note, I'll thank again all the speakers and all of you for having taken the time to be present with us, and wish you a nice end of your morning or evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
There's a problem there.